Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 14 transfer plans, and I'll be quickly recapping Gameweek 13, discussing my team, and thinking about the plans for the future. Generally, for people, of course, with any transfer plans for Gameweek 14, I think this video should be hopefully educational for you guys in terms of what the plans are, what the go-to picks are going forwards, and who our range of options are right now in the midfield. In terms of my team, of course, and my rank right now, I am sitting around 36,103. It is a bit different on Fantasy Football Hub, but I've also checked live FPL to check, and hopefully there'll be some updates after bonus points are updated later on in the day. So I ended up with 52 points in FPL. So if we quickly just scoot on over towards my team, that's the 52-point team here. And if we just quickly look at, of course, the shape of my team and the starting 11, of course, it wasn't very good. I think I made some decisions on the deadline stream that I sort of regretted in terms of Cash and Colwell. Ultimately, though, Colwell was benched. Cash effectively was benched in the second half of the fixture. Tsimikas, I suppose, would have been the one to play, but very hard to sort of justify that maybe Tsimikas would definitely start versus Man City. Maybe, of course, Joe Gomez, you have to sort of look into that sort of injury situation there, whether he's still struggling with his fitness, but of course, I think he was on the bench in that game anyways. Tsimikas actually played relatively well in the Man City game, and that actually gives me a lot of sort of positive hope ahead for that next fixture here versus Fulham, where I do actually expect Tsimikas to play at home. So that's going to be a nice positive. And of course, we have to sort of watch out for the European fixtures to see what happens to Tsimikas' minutes, because it might be the case, of course, that Gomez could play the European fixture and of course, Tsimikas could play the Premier League or vice versa. So that's something, of course, to look out for. As far as my team, though, I would say still pretty dismaying in terms of owning Colwell. There is a bit of a concern here right now when I look at him, because one thing I would say is with Chelsea, with the centre back situation, you've got effectively four centre backs outside of Colwell. You've got Thiago Silva, Badiashile, Fofana coming back as well, and then of course Disasi. And then in the left back position, you've got Cucurella competing with Colwell. Now I think in terms of Colwell's minutes versus Brighton at home, there isn't really much in contention, because I do think Cucurella is suspended, and also James, of course, he got himself suspended in that fixture versus Newcastle as well. So that should be really good for Colwell's minutes. And the question, of course, is after that, does Colwell get a run of games? And I'm really not sure right now what Pochettino is cooking, to be quite honest. He has changed his backline quite a bit. For example, he played Disasi versus Man United, then he played Badiashile versus Newcastle, and that can change quite a bit. So quite a bit of concern there in terms of whether he actually thinks that there's a stable, for example, back four that he actually likes. And we're not going to get any additional updated information on that because, of course, the suspensions are going to change the way he lines up. So that's a bit of a concern. However, Pedro Porro, I think, is another sort of shining light in the team, even though, of course, his defense is horrific, right? The Spurs defense, of course, is calamitous. I'm definitely going to put Pedro Porro as far back to the back of my bench as possible when he faces Haaland. And that's actually going to change my captaincy decision as well. I think the way Spurs are playing, the way they're so attacking, the way they're also so poor on defense, just means that I think City, it's going to be a great game for Haaland, in my opinion. So I do think this is a great chance for Haaland captaincy. And then previously, I was thinking that this was purely going to be Salah captaincy versus Fulham at home. But I do think that there's going to be a debate now between Haaland and Salah, and we'll see what happens. But right now, I'm actually leaning towards Haaland just preliminarily, just watching how Spurs are playing, trying to see, of course, that the City team actually still looks relatively good on attack. Of course, when you see them face versus Liverpool, it's a different story, but so far so good. As far as Gabriel, of course, there's a risk that once again we might have a repeat of the Sheffield United situation where he was benched, but I don't think that risk is too high here ultimately. I do think he didn't even play that many minutes in international break, so hopefully it's not going to have a huge impact on him. Other players also got a lot of minutes played during international break, players like Zinchenko and Saliba. Of course, Saliba more of a bench option for France. As far as Areola, look, I mean, he still has a good fixture this week. So even though we've got news about, let's say, Kelleher maybe coming back into the team and maybe Allison being out for 4 to 5 weeks, which we need a genuine medical update on, I think I'll still keep Areola for now, because what I'm thinking about is maybe in the future I would be moving Watkins to Darwin Nunez. And if I'm doing that, then of course the option to go from, let's say, Areola to Kelleher is sort of closed, because I want Darwin to be in my team. And Tsimikas, of course, can be good in the short term until Robertson comes back. Now, as far as Salah, of course, he's just the mainstay of the team, so no real plans for moving him out. So, of course, triple Liverpool and how you plan to play around triple Liverpool is something that we definitely need to think about. As far as, let's say, my midfield, just moving over there, a lot of people are going to be sort of laughing at the fact that I transferred out Gordon. Of course, a huge regret in terms of the outcome, but I don't think I was necessarily expecting a gulf of, let's say, 11 points between Palmer and Gordon, if I'm being completely honest. Yes, I know Gordon's done incredibly well. Yes, I know Gordon has great underlying stats, but to be honest, so does Palmer. And with Gordon, of course, I'm someone who actually bought into Gordon on Game Week 8, so I've been waiting for a long time to own Gordon. and I've enjoyed Gordon for quite a bit myself, but it's sad to, of course, transfer Gordon out in the week where he gets a huge haul. A lot of people will be asking the question, why I went into a Gordon from Palmer, or Palmer from Gordon rather, and the simple answer is actually I wanted to go out of Diaby first. I didn't think Diaby's minutes were secure. I talked about that in the transfer plans video, as well as also generally in terms of my team selection and also just any preview guides, where I did think that, of course, Tielemans coming back into the team, getting starting minutes, did mean that there was a huge concern, because previously we were seeing Zaniolo and Bailey as a substitution, but of course Tielemans coming in also means that there's more threats in terms of Diaby's minutes, and so that's the landscape of FPL right now, and the landscape of this Villa team too. And I thought that, for example, going from Diaby to Mbeumo would make sense, and I also was able to capture 3 price rises, 1 from Palmer, waiting for him to come back after the international break, and then 2 for Mbeumo so far, because he's gotten 2 price rises somehow. So I'm happy in terms of the team value point of view, but of course a huge regret in terms of the points lost. I don't regret it too much, because ultimately when I was looking at, for example, the odds between, let's say, Newcastle and Chelsea, the market odds were very close between Newcastle and Chelsea. I didn't expect Gordon to have such a beautiful game. I'm now obviously going to be looking ahead to that Man United fixture and with a little bit of regret in my mouth, but can't do anything about it. I'm pretty happy with Palmer as a pick, and I don't think I'll be moving Palmer on in the short term, neither Mbeumo. So these picks and these options, in my opinion, will at least last for until Gameweek 18. Saka and Son, that's another question mark, where of course at their sort of exorbitant price, a lot of people are asking the question, because we have so many budget picks in FPL right now that are doing so well, that are also on penalties, right? Players like Hwang, players like Gibbs White doing well this week too. Even Willian, for example, a bit of a shock to see him on penalties, but these are things that change the landscape of FPL and change, where you want to sort of spend your cash. Right now we have players like Darwin who might be a little bit more exciting, players like Isaac who might be a bit more exciting, and maybe you want to go out of Saka and Son. Personally, I still think Saka's fixtures are very good, and even for Son, in the context of course, very, very poor Man City fixture, I'm not really interested in taking Son out of my team right now. Yes, of course, I'm going to understand that the Man City fixture is going to be terrible in terms of Son, but of course, we've seen Son do well at times, even versus tough opponents, and ultimately the fixtures after that are great. I think West Ham in particular is a very good fixture, because this West Ham team have proven to be a relatively poor defense, and of course, even when we contextualize with, let's say, Aston Villa, yes, of course, Son was offside a lot. You might say that, of course, being offside, it actually just means that you don't really deserve those chances. And fair enough, I actually agree with that. But I still think that Son's going to be in position. He will be onside, in the future. So I'm not really concerned about Son's overall sort of expected chances. Even if you take away all those offside chances, his expected goal involvement was something like 0.71, which is still relatively good, right? Considering how tough that fixture might have been. On paper, Aston Villa, one of the top sides as well, particularly even on the defensive point of view this season, as a top 6 defense right now in terms of expected goals conceded. Personally, I think we don't have enough sample size right now to say, okay, this team's a good home team, this good's an away team right now. The reality is that we don't have enough data for that. Teams have not played enough games at home, enough games away for us to sort of disseminate between the two. I think it's worth just looking at the overall data for now, and obviously you can look historically in terms of their home and away effects. As far as Saka and Salah, I still think that they're keeps, of course. These are options that are still on penalties, hopefully, of course, with Saka. We just saw Bruno give away a penalty this weekend, which, of course, was a big shock, but nice, of course, in the sense that I know a lot of people own Bruno, and nice to see that Bruno that didn't get points until he assisted Martial, of course. And then, of course, with Saka, I think the question mark a lot of people are asking is, he's not taking shots. He's not, for example, creating as much XG as we thought he would. And at this sort of ridiculous price, why not just move on to the other picks? And I think that's fair enough. But I think why not just hold on to the idea of, let's say, selling Saka in the future, right? Because Saka still has 2 really good fixtures. He's got Wolves, he's got Luton. Give him those fixtures and then reassess. That's my personal opinion. I would say the same about Martinelli as well, even though his minutes are a little bit shakier. So if you wanted to move out of Martinelli, he'd be someone where I'd be a little bit more inclined to moving on from. As far as someone like Salah, for example, once again, he could still be a captaincy option this week. No plans to really move him out. As soon as, I think the earliest option might be game week 18, potentially, to move Salah out of your teams. But right now, does it really make sense to move Salah out? For me, absolutely not. As far as the forward line right now with Watkins and Haaland, as I said, I have the option of going from Watkins to Darwin in the future. And that, of course, would be nice, because what does that do for my team? It actually allows me to free up some funds. It might be, for example, giving me the chance to, let's say, if I don't go for Zinchenko this week, to go from Areola to Raya in the future. I don't have currently the money to do so, but that's what Watkins to Darwin frees up the money for. In the future, for example, in Game Week 18, if I go out of Salah or if I go out of Mbumo, in preparation of AFCON, then of course I've got the chance to move away from someone like Mbumo as well, who's actually quite expensive. I can move into some of these great budget options. For example, I could go back into Gordon around that time. So right now, those are sort of the ideas that I have in my mind. Haaland, of course, as I said, is a genuine captaincy option. And for me, the problem points in my team are definitely Cash and definitely Colwill. I think Tsimikas slightly less of a problem, but of course we have to assess the European fixtures. Another thing that I'll be assessing when it comes to European fixtures is what happens with this Arsenal team. How will they sort of line up versus Lens? And I'm actually expecting that Zinchenko could be a transfer in for me, right? Because Zinchenko so far has played in a lot of the fixtures where you'd think that there's less transitional threat. So in a game like Newcastle, maybe it doesn't really fit him. In a game like Chelsea, not surprising, I suppose, that at 45 minutes he gets hooked. But then versus some of the easier opponents where hopefully Arsenal can dominate more of the ball, which of course is sort of the prime Zinchenko game, I'm hoping that I can maybe go for a cheeky punt here with Zinchenko coming in. And of course, if I have some doubts, let's say over the minutes of Cash, the minutes of Colwill, then I actually need a defender who I think will play in this fixture here in Game Week 14. But right now, I think I don't have huge risks. There's a chance, of course, that I can just roll the transfer as well. As far as Eze as well, if people are thinking about Eze, I think Hwang has also opened up as an even better option than we previously expected. Because when we talk about the midfield, ultimately, I did not think that Hwang was on penalties. I thought that the chance would be either, Cunha on penalties or maybe Hwang on penalties. Neto might be coming back as well. But Hwang actually scoring a penalty, taking a penalty as well is quite huge, I think, in terms of when we think about penalty takers, who's the next penalty taker going to be? Usually, of course, it's going to be to the player who actually scored the previous penalty. And the same scenario I would also say for Gibbs White, right? We were previously thinking that someone like Chris Wood could come into the team because of Awoni's injury and take the penalties away from Morgan Gibbs White. But now that Gibbs White has just scored a recent penalty as well, that sort of changes things in terms of maybe how the manager orders penalty takers as well. Particularly if, let's say, the previous penalty taker doesn't have a huge history of taking penalties. And I don't think, for example, Cunha or even Neto have sort of those prolonged histories. So nice for Hwang, and particularly if you're, let's say, looking for a differential right now, I think Hwang is incredible. Palmer too as well. I think a lot of people are already moving into him, so I probably wouldn't class him as a differential. The reality, I think, is Palmer saves you even more money, right? Even more money from Hwang, Gordon, Gibbs White. These players are slightly more expensive. If you need to stretch and sort of get a better defender, get a better attacker, for example, in the forward position, then you might actually need to go Palmer. And that's sort of why I went for Palmer. It gives me the chance to go from Cash to even Walker, for example. And I was even thinking about going for James. But of course, James with his suspension, I mean, quite laughable, of course, that he got that suspension. It was really poor play from him. But there was a chance, of course, that I could go from, let's say, Cash to Walker, and that still is an option for me. I think if you're free hit 18, minded as well, you can think about someone like Ethan Pinnock, right, for this Brentford team. A lot of people might be thinking about Ayer, who could, for example, save you a little bit more money as well. But I do think that the value that Pinnock has at 4.6 is worth it, right, in terms of the guarantee for minutes. With Christophe Ayer, you can see that his minutes are a little bit shaky at times, even though the underlying stats are slightly better. I prefer to go with someone like Pinnock in those instances and not take those chances, especially with some of these teams where you're just really looking to target one fixture and maybe situations can change, but at least you have the guarantee of the player with the good minutes in terms of Pinnock. So those are the picks that I think are quite relevant in terms of Game Week 14. As far as, like, let's say forecasting beyond Game Week 14, like, what am I going to be doing with my transfers? One thing I can say is that if I don't go for the Kelleher move, then I think Darwin, as I said, on Game Week 15 is a great option as well. Because not only is the fixture on Game Week 14 or 15 good for Liverpool, it's also good on 16 as well. That general run is very good. But the issue, of course, is that the fixtures are incredibly condensed. And I do think that with someone like Ollie Watkins and with someone like John Duran being able to take away minutes in Europe, one of the nice things that Watkins provides you always is guaranteed minutes. Whereas with Darwin, I still think that, for example, even though Jota might be injured, and it actually seems to be potentially a serious injury based on Jurgen Klopp's comments after the City game at the Etihad, that of course the concern is that pretty much frees up space for Darwin to play minutes, right? Because it's only at that point Gakpo who's going to be who's going to be dealing with the sort of forward minutes burden, and then Luis Diaz might actually occupy more so the sort of minutes on the left-hand side of that Liverpool offense. And so I do think that Darwin's minutes right now seem rather good, and of course we sort of just need to understand what is going on with the Alisson injury first, and then the Jota injury as well, because that could change our plans in terms of how we adopt triple Liverpool. If you don't own Tsimikas, I think it might be a chance to also go into Tsimikas too, depending on Europe once again. And those are sort of my thoughts in terms of my Game Week 14 transfer plans. Forecasting ahead, though, as I said, it really just depends on whether I want to go for Darwin and go for maybe further upgrades, right? Upgrading on my keeper like Areola, who's been incredibly frustrating. Maybe just going for Kelleher, knowing that I won't be going for Darwin. and then waiting for Darwin when Salah goes for AFCON as well. That's another option too, because Watkins has shown up to be incredibly consistent. Now, he doesn't have major holes except for when he suddenly plays Brighton and has, for example, the sort of game of his life potentially. But this is a reality. Watkins is incredibly secure, incredibly robust. Do I feel the need to move away from him, particularly when I have so much transfer value over him and placed over him? Not really. So right now, I think the problem points are cash, and I'll probably be moving cash out first. And those are my plans right now. Happy with the position that I'm in terms of being in the top 40K. A little bit sad about losing Gordon. And obviously, the saddest thing about Gordon is I've been owning him from Game Week 8. I even was willing to take, for example, a week where he was suspended, right, to own Gordon for a while. And a little bit sad that he sort of dropped that dagger on me. But I'm happy that people own Gordon. I think he's a very good pick. I also think that we have incredible diversity in that sort of 5-point-X position in FPL. So it's really nice to see that every week we have some crazy players, all on penalties, arguably, as well, who can get these double-digit point hauls. And I think, for example, even looking at Palmer here, I'm not too regretful of that. We'll have to see, of course, what happens with Nkunku, but I still think that Nkunku will probably be taking maybe Jackson's minutes first. And also, the fact that Nkunku is not ready for the Newcastle game also speaks to the fact that maybe he's really struggling in terms of fitness, right? He has not played for a couple of months. He will need to be eased in. I really struggle to see him, for example, starting and then, for example, getting benched. It might be the case that he gets eased in through some minutes, and we'll have to see, of course, how Palmer's minutes develop. But right now, quite happy with the template sort of midfield that I have, and even the front lines. It's just about those defenders. Like, what can I do? Can I benefit from, for example, Poor in the future? Because when I field up my team for next week, I do think I'm going to be lining up something like this, for example, where I have Porro on the bench, I have Cash on the bench as well, Archer, who's actually, a very, very handy substitute once again in this week where he has an okay fixture. The midfield looks fantastic with exception to Son. I can't really bench Son, of course. I don't have anyone good enough to bench Son. Watkins and Holland both having fantastic fixtures right now, as I said, fixated on the Holland captaincy. But then also just thinking, okay, if I go out of cash, maybe I can go Zinchenko. And then if I go Zinchenko, easily, of course, that's a chance to drop Colwell onto the bench. And then, whatever situation happens, if someone gets benched like Gabriel and Simicast, hopefully Colwell can come on. Because I'm not expecting, of course, Chelsea to get a clean sheet versus Brighton. Brighton are still a very, very good offense. And if anything, I struggle to see Brighton actually not, breaking people's clean sheets week on week. That's just how good they are as an offense. So those are my thoughts right now in terms of Game Week 14. Thank you guys so much for watching. And I really appreciate the support in the channel so far. The growth of the channel has been absolutely immense. And hopefully we can get to 20K subscribers towards the end of the season. Once again, thank you so much to the members who are financially supporting the channel and making this a reality for me. So thank you guys once again, and I'll see you guys in the next video.